Welcome to Authenticity Unleashed. I'm your host, Pam Rader, and I'm here with a very special guest today, Tammy Ward, all the way from Fredericton. I can never say it. Fredericton, New Brunswick, on the other side of the country. Tammy is a motivational speaker. We have a lot in common. She's also a yoga teacher, a yoga studio owner, and a survivor of domestic abuse. But Tammy has had a very interesting life, which I'm excited to get into because her journey to authenticity has been a bit of a rocky road. Welcome, Tammy. We're so grateful to have you here.
Thank you.
So, Tammy, you speak on resilience and belief systems. Tell me a little bit about your speaking career so that we can get to know who you are now.
So a lot of my speaking started when I was still with the RCMP. I did a lot of speaking on domestic violence. I spoke at conferences. I spoke at Canadian conferences. I was in traffic services and I was teaching. I taught interview interrogation. I ran our Crime Stoppers program. So I made TV commercials and did a lot of public speaking there. So it was a natural skill set for me. And so I started speaking before I left policing, and I would speak at women's empowerment events. I spoke at different events about, as I said, domestic violence and just sharing a little bit of my journey. And then once I left the force, it was a whole lot easier to talk because I didn't have any stipulations on what I was allowed to say or any fear of if I say too much, I'm going to get myself in shit because we don't talk about those things. It's all swept under the carpet. And, the RCMP doesn't really like their dirty laundry to be discussed. So once I left, I can do whatever the hell I want. So
fair game. Yeah.
Now, the truth is the truth.
Well, here's the thing. Censorship hurts everyone.
Yes.
And whether it's an organization or we're individually censoring, it's damaging to individuals and damaging to humanity. And so whenever there's censorship, we lack freedom. So I'm really happy for you that you get to speak about your experiences and empower other people, because in our brief interaction prior to this recording, it seems to me like you have a heart for service, like you deeply care about people, and you've taken all these maybe not so great experiences and not allowed them to make you bitter or resentful, but you've turned it around and used these experiences to help others in humankind. And I think that's really extraordinary.
Oh, thank you.
For our listeners, something that, so Tammy and I met just a few days ago on Instagram, and it was an accidental meeting, but it turned out we had so much in common. And then I heard a little bit about her story and I said, oh, whoa, I really want to talk to this woman. And I think that a conversation about what we've both been through would be really valuable. I don't speak about this aspect very much, not because I'm ashamed, nothing like that, but I think that it's been so long ago, and sometimes I forget that it was so impactful in my life, but domestic violence is still going on everywhere. And in fact, I think since COVID that it's worsened because mental health has worsened, and those things, and addiction, and those things all coincide. Now, would you be comfortable with telling us a little bit about your kind of experience, your personal experience with domestic violence?
Yeah. Mine's old too. Unfortunately for me, it started after I was a police officer. So extra shame because I'm supposed to know better. And then the shame of when I started my first detachment, I was one of 5 women of over 120. So not wanting anyone to know or to judge me or think lesser of me or my abilities. So I kept it quiet, which was hard, but not hard because I'm little, I bruise easy. So if somebody saw handprints on my arms off duty, it was really easy. I lie. Oh, I was drunk last night, or I could make up something and people go, oh yeah. But at work, it's really hard. So I'm the girl who was always cold because I always wore long sleeves.
Ah.
Yeah.
Now, in my own experience, it doesn't just start with them coming out the door swinging. It
Oh gosh,
started with
no.
a verbal abuse,
Mm-hmm.
and then which led into a pressing me up against a wall a little hard or gripping my arm really hard.
Punching the
And it
wall.
eventually escalated. But once the line of physical contact has been crossed, then
There's
it was no holds barred. Was
no.
that your experience too?
Yes. For
Yeah.
me, it started out with a lot of emotional abuse. And it's still like, and I say, and it might sound horrible, but getting hit wasn't the worst of it. It was what
Yeah.
was said to me because my bruises have healed long ago.
Mhm.
But some of the things he said to me, I'm still affected by. And I remember, like, I'm little. I've always been smaller. And I remember trying so hard to stay the perfect size 2 and still hearing that I was fat, that I was ugly. He'd go out without me because I was too embarrassing to be seen with. And then it became, I wouldn't want to go places either because I felt shitty about myself. And then it also became very isolating because if I did go anywhere, he would be really mad at me and then I'd pay the price. And I remember going to a friend's baby shower and I had left my cell phone in my purse and he was trying to call me and I never answered it. So by the time I got home, he was in such a rage. There was a big hole in the wall. He had broken a phone, et cetera, et cetera. And then it was just, I thought it's not worth going anywhere anymore. So then
Yeah.
I became so isolated from my friends and my family that when he did hit me, I didn't feel that I could tell anyone because I had already shut everybody out.
Right. Yeah, my experience was my husband was an alcoholic and suffered from bipolar disorder, which I did not know at the time. I was young, 19 or 20 years old when we were together. And he worked out of town 6 weeks at a time in a mine. And then he would come home. And there were times when he was sober and things would be okay. But for me, there was more of a breaking point. I saw his mental health getting work. And when I decided I was going to leave, he lost his ever loving mind and he choked me almost to death 2 or 3 times in the course of a day, held me hostage with a knife to my throat. He sexually assaulted me in front of my child. It was a really traumatic thing, but I'll tell you what, exactly what you said. I was like, I'd take that any day of the week over all the shit he said to me that fucked my mind up for so long.
It
Because
still
he
does.
said, nobody's going to want you.
Mhm.
You think you're all that, but you're not even going to be able to get welfare. Nobody's going to hire you. No, you can't take care of a child. You're so lucky to have me. And if you leave, I will tell your whole family what a piece of shit you are. And these, I look back now and I think, oh my gosh, it's like a teenage boy. It's ridiculous. But at that time, it created a seed of doubt in me. And that doubt lasted a really long time.
Mhm.
And in fact, led me into my second marriage to a very kind man who were still dear friends. But I married a man 12 years older than me that I probably had no business marrying just because it was responsible and safe and I didn't want to make a mistake again,
I dated somebody for almost 8 years because he was kind and safe.
Yeah. And so it alters the trajectory of our lives and we're not living our lives. Even when we leave that relationship, we're not living our own lives, are we?
Nope. I
For a long
still,
time.
to this day, I'll look in the mirror and go, oh my God, I look fat. And I have a friend who goes, and what size are your pants? And I'll say, and she goes, exactly, shut up.
Yeah. Yeah. These things, they're, constant spaced repetition of ideas, whether they're true or not, will alter our subconscious.
Oh, yeah.
Now, not only did you endure domestic abuse, but once you left that relationship, you're in the RCMP and you're a woman in the RCMP. Now, I
Yeah.
have a couple of friends who are women in the RCMP who have since left and have told me multiple stories of the old boys club and covering things up. And, I'll just share this. I'm not going to share anything from someone else's life, but when I finally had the courage to call the RCMP the first time before my husband held me hostage, but at this time he put me in a headlock and had been punching me in the head. And I called the RCMP and the gentleman showed up and said, "Are you really sure you want to do this? Because you can't take it back."
That's somebody who's lazy and doesn't want to do a file.
Yeah. And that put so much shame in me. I felt like the bad guy, but an organization that would allow that to happen, that disturbs me. And I can't imagine being a woman surrounded by attitudes like that. Tell me a little bit about your journey in the RCMP.
Oh, there's so much to say. There's a whole book to write. Um,
I hope you
so
write it one day.
I'm starting. I think I got 6 chapters done. So a part of my career was really good.
Mhm.
And then we had a change in management. So our superintendent changed. And when he changed, my wonderful career turned into a really, really shitty place to be,
Mhm.
to the point that I was off work for a long time, on stress leave.
Mhm.
I filed a human rights complaint. I hired a lawyer out of province. And it wasn't until Ottawa got served that anything changed, because in my province, my complaint was against the third highest ranking officer in the province. I'm a constable, I'm a nobody. And Little Boys Club just pretended nothing was wrong, and things just kept getting worse and worse and worse and worse.
Were you
And
being
nobody,
harassed?
I was being harassed. Somebody gave him access to my medical file.
Mhm.
So, which is supposed to be private. And we didn't have Medicare cards at the time.
Mhm.
We had everything done in-house. So
Mhm.
we have our own healthcare. Supposedly all our files are under lock and key. Somebody gave him access to mine. And he found out about one of the assaults, which only 3 people knew about.
Mhm.
And he made it very public and made fun of me, quoting something I'll never forget. I was so fucking pathetic to let that happen to myself in my own house. I shouldn't be allowed to wear a uniform.
Oh,
Yeah.
I'm so proud of you that you served that man. Like, that is what's wrong with the world. That's why there are women right now, as you and I speak, and you know this because you've attended many of these things. As you and I speak, there are young women, older women in a house that are terrified to say anything to anybody and who might very well not be as lucky as you and I. They might lose their lives
Mhm.
because of comments like that.
Yep.
And so I raised 4 sons. And I think that the healing and all of that has to start with, how are we raising our sons? How are we teaching young men
To
to deal
treat
with this? How are we,
people.
like, it's not acceptable to say something like that.
I worked with an officer who one night following a domestic, and this was after I had already been hurt and he wasn't aware, say, well, she's stupid enough to stay there. She deserves what she gets.
Well, let's talk about this. What are the reasons? You and I can have a little candid chat about this. What are the reasons why we stayed, Tammy? What are some reasons why you stayed?
Feeling trapped, being told that you're so useless, nobody else would want you, you're lucky to have me. At the time, we owned a large gym and I had co-signed everything, the
Mhm.
building, the equipment, like everything. My name was on everything. And if I walked away, how was I going to get my name off everything? And how is that going to look? So that was a part of it. And then the fact that I'm wearing a uniform and I'm letting this, well, not letting, but it
You
was
were
happening
enduring. You were enduring.
during, and just it was just shame. It was just
Yeah.
pure shame until I finally asked him to leave. And that's when I got hurt the worst.
And this is the whole thing. It's shame that keeps us there. And when
Mm.
there are comments from people in society who know nothing about it that increase shame, what they also do is increase the likelihood that you and I are going to die in that situation.
Exactly. And there's a lot of other reasons like that weren't my personal reasons, but well, kind of the financial one. But there's a lot of women, especially women with children, who might have chosen to stay at home until the kids get to school, so they no longer have a career, or maybe they've never had a career because they wanted to be mummies, and then they don't have an income. So how do you leave when you have no money and you
Yeah.
have babies to feed and put a roof over their head? How do you leave when you're in a rural area and there isn't a shelter close by, or you don't have access to a vehicle? You don't have, not everyone's blessed to have a family that they can turn to
Yeah.
or help them financially or otherwise. Pets, I've learned, is a huge barrier for a lot of women, especially if he is hurting your dog or your cat or whatever animal you have, or it's used as a threat. I saw that on duty. I remember specifically one night a man said to a lady that I was helping leave that if she left, he would effing shoot her dog. So, not knowing what else to do back then, I put her dog in my car, and I ended up keeping her dog at my house for 3 days until she made arrangements for a friend to come and get it. But there's so many things that we don't even think about that can be
Yeah.
barriers. Another lady I helped, she had an autistic child, and changing his routine was something that was very difficult for her. So there's so many barriers that unless you encounter it, you don't have a clue. And then getting into cultural and religion. I mean, some people's faith says that if you marry him, you stay there no matter what happens. Well,
Yeah.
to me, that shouldn't be a part of faith. Nobody deserves that.
Yeah.
That's my opinion.
It happens to be mine too.
I don't think anybody's God, whatever you call him, wants a woman to go through that. So then, and then there's family, because some families say, well, you made the choice to marry it,
Yes. Yes.
which I think is maybe leaving. I think, like if you go
It's
back 30,
changing to
40 years
some
ago,
degree. Yeah.
yeah, that mentality perhaps is leaving, but then some cultural things are very different where divorce is not an option.
I'll
In
tell you
some
why
places.
I didn't. One of the main reasons I didn't leave. My dad's great. I love my dad. But my dad's a pretty redneck guy. And I actually sort of knew in my heart, if I told my dad he wouldn't just go beat up my head. He would have murdered him. And then my dad's going to spend the rest of his life in jail because of me. And I actually thought that. And I look back now and I think he probably wouldn't have actually murdered him, but like I thought that.
Yeah.
And so I didn't want my dad to get in trouble. And then the same with the animals. I had a dog and I had a baby and all of that stuff. But you said something to me before we recorded, and I want to mention this. Anytime I tried to leave, he would rip every phone cord out of the wall.
Oh yeah.
I couldn't even contact anybody if I wanted to. And this for me was before cell phones. And you said that happened to you as well.
Yeah.
So even if you get brave enough to leave,
Mhm.
now you've put yourself in a dangerous physical situation where you can't contact anyone if something happens.
And it made him madder when I went for a phone.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I got hit in the head with the phone a few times. Yeah. So I love that we're talking about this, because if we can educate people at all about what the reasons people stay, I think that's helpful because we can have some dialogue. I
I
want to
do
say
have
something.
one other thing.
Yeah.
And there are some really good cops out there. Just like every profession, there's some really good people, and there's some people who shouldn't be wearing that uniform, or shouldn't be a doctor, shouldn't be a nurse, shouldn't be whatever. But one of the women that I met who had gotten out of a domestic violence situation, and I met her speaking at a conference, she shared with me that what made her eventually leave was a male police officer had attended. Many other police officers had attended before, but this man took the time and looked at her in the eyes and said, "You do realize you deserve to be treated better than this." And a perfect story, she would have left with him, but she didn't. And she said, it made me think, because my entire life, since she was a little girl, she grew up in a violent home. She'd been beaten by her father. Her mother had endured domestic violence. So for her entire life up until then, she had only been told, you aren't worth shit. You're this, you're that. Nobody had ever told her that she deserved a better life.
Yeah.
And it was that seed that somebody planted that grew, and eventually she left. So what we
Yeah.
say
Oh,
and
so
what
you
we
never
do.
know. We don't know. And you know, for me, it was actually, I was working at Overweighty, which is like Sobeys. It's same kind of thing. And there was a girl that worked there. She still lives in my town, actually. And I went to work one day and I called home. It was one of my first days at work, and I had poured all the booze down the sink. I had taken my husband's car keys because we had a baby, did everything to make sure that at the time, I think my son was like 8 months old, that he would be looked after and that there was no danger. And I phoned on my lunch hour, and the phone rang and rang and rang, and there was no answer. And my husband had a back injury at the time. He couldn't walk outside. And I was like, where did he go? And she was standing, this girl, her name was Selena. She was standing beside me, and I could tell that she knew what was
Mm-hmm.
going on. And she said, let's go. I'm going to help you get out of here. And she explained to the boss, and I went home. After that, anyways, at the time, my husband was drunk. He had alcohol delivered to him by a cab and paid with a check. And then he had a cigarette hanging out of his mouth. My baby's screaming his head off in his crib. And I lost my ever loving mind. And that turned into an incident where I called the RCMP. And that's the time when the fellow said, do you really want to do this? But this woman said to me at work, I've been where you are. And if you ever need help, all you have to do is pick up the phone and then hang it up. Call my number and hang up. And my husband and I will come and get you. And just knowing that someone knew, that gave me the courage.
Mm-hmm.
It took me a while after that, but that really gave me the courage. There was someone who saw and someone who would help. So say something, right? If we see something, say something. Let someone know. Now, the other thing that I want to say is this. I know of people right here in our town that have been murdered because they try to leave.
Mm-hmm.
And they didn't bring somebody with them, and they didn't tell somebody. Always, always, if you're going to leave, bring somebody with you and tell somebody what's going on, because if you do it by yourself, you're in trouble.
Or make sure when you go to leave that they're not any place close. Like, don't. Yeah, it's so tricky. Like, every situation is so different, and just because they never have before doesn't mean they won't.
Yeah.
I've heard, oh, he won't hurt me. He doesn't. And then I've seen things afterwards, and it's like, oh.
Yeah.
And same with.
So you survive domestic abuse, you get out of that relationship, and then you're attending domestic abuse scenarios, and you saw some pretty awful things.
Yeah.
And that has to weigh on you.
It did. I remember after I was hurt, and I was off work for over 2 months before I went back. And at the time, I had the best, most caring man I've ever worked with. And I was back at work, I think, on my third day, which was a night shift. And I remember specific, it was a Friday night. It was super busy. I had walked in the back door, and the phone rang, and they wanted me to go to the hospital because there had been a sexual assault on a small child. And I'm the girl. So I went, and then I got back. And then later on in the evening, it was before midnight, we had a bad domestic. I attended that as well. And then I had gone back into the office, and I remember Eddie, who was my corporal, when I went in, he goes, how are you doing? And of course I lied. I'm okay. And he goes like this, he puts his arms out. He goes, come here. He gives me a big hug. I broke down crying. He's like, go home. He says, you're only here because you think you should be, and everyone tells you you should be. Go home. And I went back home. Yeah. But there's very few people, very few men like that I worked with. I mean, I had a lot of support from certain people, but that was like, that was 20 plus years ago. And it's still like it was yesterday with him.
Well, let's talk about the connection between that and yoga, because we know that the very first principle of yoga is ahimsa, which is non-harming or kindness.
Yeah.
And we don't know when that one little word of kindness that we say means everything to someone. And in a world where there is domestic violence and children are being sexually assaulted,
We just hate.
yeah. And so I think that this is the thing, that the essence of the thing that you and I have in common. It's like, we know there's evil in the world. We know these things are going on, but how can we be the perpetuators of more kindness, of more understanding, of healing, and of self-expression so that people don't feel alone?
Yeah. Well, that's why I talk, because when I was going through what I went through, both with the harassment and the force and what was going on in my home prior to that, I just felt so isolated and so shameful. And, how stupid am I because this is happening to me? It wouldn't happen to anybody else but me. Like,
Mhm.
so that's a part of why I want to talk, so that people know, one, you're not alone. Two, there's light at the end of the tunnel, and I can hook you up with resources. I might not have the answers, but I'll find you someone that does. Like, so
Mhm.
that's why I like to talk about the domestic violence. I like to talk about mental health because I've lost friends. I've attended way too many suicides, and it's something that is shameful, and it shouldn't be. Like, I just did a talk a couple of weeks ago and I called it the other F word because I find it's an epidemic. How are you doing? I'm fine. Everything's
Yeah.
fine. Life is fine.
I
Nothing's
love that. The
wrong.
other F word.
Yes.
Yes. I think nice is a 4-letter word too. It's like falls
Yeah.
into that same thing. Like, just let's just put on a nice face.
Yeah. Fix your
Yeah.
makeup. Everything's fine. So yeah, I talked about that, and I never say the same thing twice because I just talk.
Mhm.
And I always get asked, how come you don't have anything written down? And I'm like, well, my truth is my truth. You don't have to write it down because you've lived it. So I don't have to try to remember it. So I never say the same thing twice. And when I finished that one, it wasn't a part of anything I had ever practiced. At the end of it, I said, my challenge and my ask of everyone is to please stop using that word. Don't ask somebody how they're doing if you're not going to stop and actually have a conversation. And I said, find another word, then fine. And mine right now is fucking fabulous. And it just came out. Those were my F words. Um,
So that's interesting because when I've been training yoga teachers for a decade, and I own Shift Power Yoga here in West Kelowna, and I've got a team of amazing teachers. And one of our policies at our studio is we never say, "How are you?" when people come in the door. We look at the person and acknowledge them in some other way. Like, I'm really glad you're here today.
mhm,
I'm so happy you made it to your mat. We've missed you.
mhm.
Or, tell me about the soccer tournament you were in last weekend. Like, we're striving. We don't always get it perfect, but to actually let people know, I see you. Because we
Mhm.
get asked all day long, how are you? Fine, good, 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 fine, bye.
It's
It's
just, yes.
nothing. It's just wasted air. But when we can pause and say, I want this person to feel seen and heard and known, because we don't know what someone's enduring when they leave that yoga studio, what
Mhm.
it's like behind closed doors at their house or at their work. Maybe they're being harassed. And that moment of, hey, I see you, that could save somebody's life and or their mental health.
Yeah. Or both.
Yeah. Now,
Yeah.
tell me a little bit about these programs that you were a part of, the Silent Witness Project, and where the animal fostering thing. I want people to hear about this because I
Okay.
love beauty that's born from out of the cracks of all this horror.
Yeah. So the Silent Witness Project, there are chapters or committees all across Canada. I became a part of one while I was policing. So I've been a part of that for over 15 years. It
Mhm.
was in existence prior to me. And what it does is we help communities and families. Part of their healing is to create a red silhouette in honor of the woman that was killed. And originally, when I started, we only had a small amount. So it was an exhibit, and it would move around from city to city, location to location. Unfortunately, it grew to such a large number that it was no longer possible to transport them together. So then we looked at options, and what we ended up doing was separating the witnesses and putting them back into their own communities. And what we did is we reached out to different organizations in the towns and cities where the women were killed, so that instead of them being kept in a carrying case in a closet or downstairs at a facility, they were being honored and shown. And what each silhouette has is a shield on the front of them,
Mm-hmm.
and it talks about who they were as a person. There's a line on how they died, but we don't give much credit to the person who killed them. We don't even say their name. We describe the women. She was a mother. She was a daughter. She was a sister. She loved gardening. She was a lover of animals. She worked at this place, whatever the family wants to have on the shield to recognize her. And then there's one line or two lines about how she died, because it is important that people know how they died, because it's the truth of domestic violence that when we don't speak up, or when we know something's going on and we don't do anything, or we see something and we turn away, these are the results. So it's very important that we read them. And for me, when I read one of the shields, I was like, that is me, but I'm alive because he didn't pull the trigger.
Yeah.
She's not alive because he did pull the trigger. And that really scared the shit out of me when I read this lady's shield, because she was a lover of animals, and she didn't have kids, and it was like, oh my God, that's
gave
me.
me chills all over my body, because you're right.
Me, except
there by the grace of God go you and I. Yeah.
I say that often. Yeah.
Wow. That's such a beautiful way to honor people, and also to start a conversation.
And we've had them so that the family, like, we never build one without the family's permission. Like, the family has to be on board or we won't do it. It doesn't matter if everybody else in the community wants it. If the family's not ready, then they're not ready on their healing. And then we've had them, I remember a couple of them being made. It was a community college where the craftsmen they were doing carpentry. They actually cut out the shields for the family, and they helped the family and a few of the community members with creating the shields. So it brought a lot of awareness into the school, which is super important. I know in Fredericton here, we have a First Nation, St. Mary's First Nation. Unfortunately, they had a couple of women who were killed in domestic violence, and they did a beautiful ceremony. Like, they created it. It was all filmed. There's actually a film that was the stories of the women, the creation of the silhouettes. And then it was one of the most beautiful ceremonies. Every time a silhouette is made, there's a ceremony to honor her as she joins the other women. And it's open to community. It's just a way to create more awareness. So that is still something I'm involved in.
I want to pause there, just because you said in schools, and I think this is really important, because my first experience with domestic violence wasn't with my husband. I was 15 years old, and I was dating an 18-year-old boy who was the first one to shove me against walls and started emotionally blackmailing me, and that turned very violent. And there were teachers who I knew.
Shame on them.
And it was just the culture. In the 80s, nobody talked about it. And so I don't know that they even knew what to do. I don't hold anything against them, but I love that there's conversations and awareness and a place for people to talk about these things, and projects like this that spark these conversations, so that if something like this is known, there's a pathway forward.
Yeah.
Now, you also are an animal lover, so tell me about that.
So one of the barriers that I had seen on duty, like I said, about taking the lady's dog, but also through research. So one of the ladies that I worked with, she ran PLEASE, which is the public legal education. And she's a lawyer by trade and a researcher. And they were doing a study on long guns, and because there's a lot of rural parts in New Brunswick, and that the propensity of a home with a long gun and a woman being killed. And during their research, they came across women staying for animals. So then that became a whole research. And
so
one
women
of the barriers,
staying in abusive situations because they don't want to leave their animals behind. Okay.
Because in a lot of situations, men will hurt the animal if you leave, that, you try to leave and they hurt the animal, that's what I'm going to do to you. Or if you try to leave, I'm going to do this again, or I'm going to kill. I've heard that one more than once, kill their animal. Unfortunately, I've seen it happen. And so it's a mechanism for fear and to prevent somebody from leaving. And unfortunately, the way that our shelters are is people cannot bring an animal into a shelter. And there's so many reasons, and it's not a shelter's fault. It's because people have allergies. There's a lot of kids. Everybody's emotions are heightened. An animal, especially a dog that comes out of something like that, when a child runs, there's a chance that it could be, the dog could bite somebody. So animals can't go to shelters. So we identified that as a big barrier for women staying because they don't want to see their animal get hurt. So they'll stay behind and they endure more so that their pet isn't hurt. And like for me, and
all of this just breaks my heart. All of it.
Ladies say to me, I can no sooner leave my dog behind than I could my son.
Yeah.
Because she knows what her spouse would do. So what we did is there's 6 of us that create it. It's called Safe for Pets 2. We have a Facebook page where we have a website. And what we did is we created a fostering system. So we're very fortunate. We have some amazing partners that make it a reality. We're all volunteers. So it's not like 24/7. We show up in 10 minutes. You have to apply. So it's done through either any of the shelters, outreach, through the police. You fill out a form so that legalities are covered as well. And then we make arrangements. So our NSPCA, because a part of their mandate is protection of animals, they will pick up the pet from a safe location or at the shelter. They never go to the home because that could be really bad for everybody. And they pick up the animal. The animal is then taken to a vet to make sure it's okay, because sometimes, unfortunately, some of the animals we've taken into care have been hurt. A lot of them don't have their shots because that's, again, money and control. So the vets, the vets will give them their shots. And then the animal is fostered for 30 days. And then it's reassessed because sometimes, especially if it's a woman with children, they need a little longer to get some money or to find a place where they can safely move to and be able to have their pet. And then once the woman is at a shelter and into a safe home, then the pet is returned to them. And we've been doing that since 2009. And we've helped well over 100 women.
This is something I want to get involved in. I love that you're saying this right now. Shift Power Yoga supports the women's shelter here in our town. And as you're saying this, I'm just like, I have 15 acres. I have neighbors that have acreage and we have animals. And I'm like, I would do that in a second. And so we're going to talk later because I want to know how we can do this here. Because I think I had a dog too. And that was one of the reasons I was afraid to leave. And it turned out my neighbors took the dog for me. Thank goodness.
Yeah.
But yeah, wow, that's incredible. You're a really, incredible woman. You're very resilient, but you also just have this great, like this quality that I can feel like the Energizer Bunny quality. Like you're going to not just resilience, but like, I'm going to keep going in service and make a difference despite all of this stuff that happens to me. Like you strike me as just watch me. Watch me.
I'm a little stubborn.
I love that. Okay. So now this all came at a big cost to you though. And I don't want to pass over this because PTSD can happen in an instant.
Yeah.
But it most often happens with an accumulation of trauma. And you had an accumulation of trauma.
A lot.
And there's been a big cost to you. Will you talk a little bit about that?
So my career. So in 2014, we're coming close to the date. There's a shooting of 5 police officers. I was around the corner when first shots were fired. I wasn't on duty, but I was there. I was visiting my friend with a newborn. And we had 5 officers shot, 3 fatally. So I was involved in that. I went in to work that night. I didn't have my uniform because I was there to present at a conference. It was in my hometown, where I used to police, where I started my policing career. The men were killed 1 street away from where I used to live, literally my backyard. And I went in, I was in a dress, so I couldn't really do much in a police car, but I helped set up our command center. I got everything ready for ERT teams that were arriving from all over, got cars, got everything. I stayed until 3 something in the morning, went back to the hotel, left at 7 with 2 of the men that were at the conference. We drove back to Fredericton, which is almost a 2-hour drive, got our uniforms, guns, went back. I was in a car when the man that killed them was found. And then I ended up originally staying for 2 weeks to work. And then I was asked to stay for another month. Was a sergeant, so operational NCO. So I took on the team the men were killed on, and was running that shift. And then my 1 month became another 3-month extension, and they kept wanting me to stay. 2 things happened, or more than 2, but 12 days after the shootings, unfortunately, because I was the operational NCO, we had a suicide of a retired member, who was my friend, hang himself. So I had to attend, notify the family, the coroner, all those horrible things. And the RCMP have never asked me if I was okay. I
can't even imagine. And my heart is just breaking right now. And then to lose a friend and
pretend to okay. Just suck it up, buttercup, because that's what we do. You signed up for this. I didn't sign up for that. And I think I had 5 minutes to get back to the office when everything, after being there for a few hours. That was the only time I cried, that 5-minute back to the station, and then pretend I'm okay, because one, I'm running the team. I'm the ranking officer in the building at that time. I'm also one of very few women around, and I'm the boss. So I'm not allowed to cry because you're not allowed. And I'd also had witnessed, it's a man, if he gets a little weepy, especially after everything that happened. Oh, what a kind soul. Oh my God, what a nice man. A woman? Oh my God, you're weak. You shouldn't be doing that job. Do you need a tampon? I've actually was asked that once. Yeah.
Yeah, I need one to shove up your ass. That's what I would want to say.
That is my answer now. It wasn't when I first started my career, because I was just taken aback. But what it taught me was women do not show emotion. We cannot ever cry. We cannot ever show any kind of emotion.
Wow.
Yeah.
And so you're becoming someone in all of that. And this is the point I want to get to. When we are forced to be something that we are not, something unnatural to us, to suppress, to hold in, to become some robot version of ourselves, when we are living so inauthentically, it breaks something in us.
Yeah, it does. For me, it took a toll on my physical health. When I was in Moncton, I would run every day. I went to the gym all the time. I'm one of those weird people that when I'm stressed, I don't eat because I just don't think about it. I ran every day, sometimes twice. But I used to run to the point that I'd either throw up or almost throw up. And then I'd turn around and I'd run back. I went to the gym every day, and I'm kind of one of those weird people. When I'm stressed, I completely forget about eating. So after being away from home for the 4 months, I came back home to Fredericton. I was only home a week. And then I had another friend who was a serving member commit suicide. I was at the gym at 6 o'clock in the morning, and the news came up, and his picture in red surge was on the screen, and they were talking about his death. That's how I found out. And I lost my shit. I went home, I cried for 3 days, and then I finally called my doctor. God bless him. He took me right in. He made it work. And the first thing he said to me was, "You need to get on a scale." I was like, "No, for a lady in her 40s, I get a 6-pack. I'm rocking it." And he's like, no, get on a scale. So I got on the scale. I weighed 113 pounds. My blood pressure was 70 over 43. And I didn't sleep. And so we had a little conversation. He put me off work. He's like, "I can't believe you're working with your blood pressure that low. You shouldn't be able to. You should pass out, not be running around doing what you're doing." and he gave me some medication to sleep because it sounds like I'm crazy, but I said to him, I said, I don't sleep because all I see is dead people. So I stay awake until I pass out. And then as soon as I have a nightmare, I'm up and I stay up. So I was lucky for 4 months if I got 3 to 4 hours of sleep. So by the time I hit my wall, my body was like in such a place. I ended up being off for 5 months, just taking time to heal. My family doctor was really good about it. The RCMP were not. I remember asking for a referral to go speak to a psychologist, psychiatrist through OSI, which is operational stress injury, which is for military and RCMP. And unfortunately, there was a 3-month waiting list.
Oh my goodness. That's unacceptable when we have people willing to lay their lives on the line for us. You get to go first, man. Like, come on.
This is a clinic just for us, and there's still that
And
kind
it's
of
still, that is, wow.
That's why more police officers die by suicide than in the line of duty,
Oh my
unfortunately.
goodness.
Yeah. And so I was waiting, and then I got called in to go see the HSO, which is our health services officer. And he looked at me. I'd only been off about 2 weeks at this time. And he looks at me and he goes, I don't see anything wrong with you. You can go back to work tomorrow. And I literally had to have a meltdown in his office and remind him of all the reasons I couldn't go to work. And I said, you were the one who wrote the referral for me to go talk to somebody. I haven't even talked to somebody yet. And you're telling me I don't need to. Why the hell did you write the referral? And then he was like, well, you can go back to work. And I remember saying to him, have you ever gone to work and had to cut your fucking friend down? And he just looked at me. I said, then stop judging me. And
Good for you.
that was the only reason I stayed off. And I fought more than once about coming back. Like he kept saying, oh, with them, if it's not broken and bleeding, it doesn't count. It's gotten better, but at that point it didn't. And when I was off at one point, he said to me, and I think it's because I'd already gone through the harassment and so much other bullshit in my life that I got very outspoken and got a backbone, because he had said to me, well, if you're not ready to come back to work, I could start the medical discharge.
Oh, so like a veiled kind of threat.
Well, it was. And I said, that is a threat. And I can call my lawyer and you can discuss what you just said with him.
Good for you.
And he backed right down again. But I was like, fuck you. Like you sit in this little office. You have no idea what I've been through. And you're sitting here judging me.
Now, I would never compare what I've been through to what you've been through. That's for sure. But I want to talk about, I also had PTSD, and it showed up a little bit. Well, maybe it's like the symptoms were different, but it showed up 2 or 3 years after these incidents, because when I left, I just put one foot in front of the other. And I'm like, yeah, so what? My husband tried to kill me. And actually there was a second episode. I had moved into a basement suite and he showed up there with a knife, punched in the glass. And the guy that I was seeing at the time had to fight with him out the door. And there was a whole like helicopter chase, and they had to it was just horrific, and I'm running out on the street with my kid. And anyways, but I just got up and went to work. When I escaped the first time, my eyes were so bloodshot. There was no whites left in them. They were burgundy, like not just bloodshot, fully burgundy from being choked. And I just showed up to work the next day, and my boss is like, honey, you can't be here. Like,
yeah,
look at you.
Survival mode. And I think that's totally what so many people don't realize. They're like, well, what's wrong with you now? You were doing it for 4 months. And it's like,
totally. Well, that's what I was saying. I went back to work, and then I went to school, and I got a different job. And then I had this supervisor who was quite a bully. And she called me a silver spoon bitch at work one day. And she didn't like me and kind of had it in. And that was actually the tipping point. I started not being able to sleep. I started sweating all the time. I felt like I would cry at the drop of a hat. I was very defensive and reactive. I just couldn't handle anything. And when I went to my doctor, and he said, I've been waiting for you for 3 years. You have PTSD. And I never would have put 2 and 2 together. But
Yeah.
this bully at work kind of tipped me over the edge. And it sounds like that's a similarity. It's like not necessarily, I mean, all the accumulation, but then meanness. It's just the straw that breaks the camel's back.
Yeah. And it's different for everyone. Like, I remember one of the men I worked with, it seemed like nothing bothered him, right?
Mm-hmm.
Attended all kinds of like really bad calls, and he was good. Until he and his wife had their first child. And we attended a SIDS call, and it was a baby girl who was the same age as his daughter, and the baby had died in the crib. That affected him more than all of the horrible things prior to that had ever affected him, because now that was real. That was it really, really shook him to the core. And that just goes to show, like, it can be something minor, it could be something, it just has to be a trigger.
Well, here's the thing, my heart and your heart, and it depends on how much, I think, how much we're carrying already, what we've been exposed to.
Your bucket.
And this is one thing that I'd like to say about all of this domestic violence stuff. Don't compare your heart to somebody else's.
Mm-mm.
Everyone's level of resilience is different. Everyone's experience is different. Everyone's nervous system is different. Their ability to tolerate things is different. And just because you went through something harder doesn't negate someone else's suffering. And we need to be compassionate about what other people are going through. If they say they're suffering, let's believe them.
What I say, and I've said it when I talk, but I started saying it when I was teaching yoga, because I was running a trauma sensitive class just for women. And I said about the trauma, I said, we don't talk about trauma because I don't want to re-trigger anybody. I'm not a licensed therapist either. So if you need a referral, I know some people. And two, trauma is not a hierarchy. And I don't ever want anyone to feel like what they've been through isn't bad enough or good enough to be here. Like, if your worst day is somebody dumped you or divorced you, God bless you. Like, that is still your worst. Your worst day is your worst day. My worst day is just different.
Yeah, 100%. Now, here's another little tidbit that I want to chat about, because I wasn't always that way. I actually got desensitized because of everything I went through. And then when my son was in addiction, I was chased by gangsters and had to be followed around by the RCMP undercover to protect me from being killed by gangsters. Like, it was a nightmare for a decade. And so, but I got desensitized. And then when people would come to me with their what I perceived as small things, I could not have empathy. I could not relate. And one day I woke up to this idea. I was in a yoga practice. I can't remember if I was practicing or teaching. And I thought, oh my gosh, I don't need them to desensitize. I need to resensitize. Resensitization is my work, because I had to desensitize to survive. Did you find some of that too?
Not so much. I think because I've for so long I had always been working with people with trauma. So, or I was either dealing with, like, I used to joke around that I'm either dealing with the people that you don't take home to meet your mother, or I'm dealing with somebody during the worst day of their life that are good human beings. So I was always dealing and helping other people through their traumas. So I don't think I ever really got desensitized, because it's a part of who I am.
You had to be empathetic as part of your job.
And one of the reasons, when I was in Moncton, when I had already been there for a while, and they gave me another 3-month extension, and I asked the inspector, I said, why do you want me to stay here? There's people with a lot more operational experience than me. And his answer was, because I saw what you did yesterday. And what I had done the day before is, I'm touchy-feely. Like, I'm in so many ways totally was never like the rest of the RCMP. Taught yoga. I'm a vegetarian. I don't smoke. I don't eat fast food. I don't eat donuts. So, all those stereotypes, they aren't a part of me. And so what had happened was, he saw me when one of the men had come back to work that was working the night of the shootings. that was very close to one of the members that were killed. And when he came back, he was seated at a computer in a bullpen. And I went over and I was speaking to him, and instinctively I put my hand on his back. And I guess as I was talking to him, I was rubbing his back. And the inspector noticed that. And he said, "It's not the experience that I need here, Tammy." He said, "It's you." He said, "I've never seen anybody do what you do." And he said, "That's what I need here." And he went on to say that he noticed that people would actually come in my office and talk to me, which isn't the norm.
And I love that, because as you said, there are great people in every career. And I don't want us just sitting here like this is just a bitch fest about the RCMP, because I'll tell you what,
amazing people that would give you the shirt off their backs.
I have had so many interactions through my son's stuff. And then the day that I finally ended up having to escape, the gentleman was so kind. He pulled out a pack of cigarettes and he said, "Do you smoke? Because you can have one if you want." And I said, "I don't, but I think I'm going to take it up today. Thank you." And he was just so patient and so kind. And he let me ride in the front seat with him. It was like, took me right to the hospital, waited with me. He was so gentle. And I know that man's name, and I have been able to thank him since then. But I've had equally a number of good experiences. So, people are people everywhere we go.
All colors, all sizes, all genders. I
love that you had the courage to stand up to the organization and say, "We need more good people, and this is not going to be tolerated." Good for you. So if people want to hear what you have to say, Tammy, because I'm just fascinated. You haven't had an incredible life, and you've got this big heart of service. You want to empower and inspire others. And just chatting with you inspires me. So where can people find you if they want to bring you in to speak at their event?
I have a website. It's super easy to find me. It's TammyWardSpeaks.com. You can also contact me through Instagram. So my Instagram handle is Your Truth Lies Within. My business name is my initials, TLW. So my business name is Truth Lies Within.
And we're going to post all of that stuff in the comments below so people can click on it. But I have a couple things I want to say. Number one, thank you so much for just reaching out on Instagram and connecting. And because I love connectors of people, and I don't believe in coincidences. We were clearly meant to meet. I'm so grateful for this conversation. For anyone who's listening, who knows anyone who may be struggling with domestic violence, step in, say something, offer help. And if you are struggling with domestic violence, reach out. Find me, find Tammy. We will connect you with resources. We might not have the answers, but we can help you get the resources.
Google has all the answers too.
Yes.
Like all of the shelters, addresses obviously aren't given, but phone numbers are. And worst case scenario, call your local police force. You can call 911 if it's an emergency. If it's not an emergency, those numbers are in the phone book too.
Yeah. So do that. But I just want to thank you for all of the years of service that you gave and the impact that you had on the organization that now is the RCMP, because I'm going to bet it's different because of you.
I'd hope so. I know at least some people I worked with would carry some of that.
You know what? You just own that, because I guarantee there's nowhere that you go that's not different because of you.
Oh, thanks.
And so thank you so much for taking the time to hang out with me, to chat with me. I think this is a subject that needs discussing, and I feel really blessed to have had this conversation. So for those of you listening, if you like the show, please subscribe to the show. If you know someone who could use this conversation, please share it with them. The intention of this show is to help people live their most authentic and fulfilled lives. And we know people can't do it if they are enduring domestic violence. So let's spread the word. Until next time.